What would drive a prince to beg? Not metaphorically, not diplomatically, but on the phone, raw voice cracking, pacing barefoot under Montecito stars. Whispers of please, I'll do anything, carrying through the open patio doors. And on the other end, silence. Not the pause of hesitation, the pause of a man who had already decided. King Charles didn't answer right away, not because he was unsure, but because he knew what the next words would mean, not just for his son, but for the monarchy, for the institution, for everything he'd spent 74 years preparing to lead. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. 2 words. That's all it took. It's over. But how did it come to this? How does a father tell his own son that he's done fighting for him? How does a monarch cut off his blood and legacy with such finality, knowing the whole world is watching? And more importantly, why now? Let's rewind. Because this isn't just about a phone call, or a falling out, or a feud that's spiraled out of control. This is about power. This is about survival. And for King Charles, this is about legacy. His legacy, one that he has waited nearly a lifetime to protect. And when push finally came to shove, when the pressure reached a boil, he didn't fold. He drew a line in the sand. A line that Harry never expected to see. Let's set the scene. It's late November. Cold air has crept into Windsor. Christmas lights glitter across London, but inside Clarence's house, things are anything but festive. Charles, now firmly seated as king, has just concluded a tense meeting with his most senior aides. Documents lie scattered across the table. Some are legal, others are personal. All of them damning. There's an envelope with Harry's name on it, but it isn't sealed. Yet, because something is still missing. A choice. And across the Atlantic, Harry paces. He knows something's coming. He's felt the chill for months. Ever since that disastrous Netflix deal started crumbling. Ever since whispers of Meghan's solo ambitions started circling in Los Angeles. Ever since William stopped replying to texts. And Charles? Cold silence. So he calls. Now ask yourself this. What kind of desperation drives a man, once second in line to the throne, to throw away pride and protocol and beg for a seat back at the table? What did Harry really want? Redemption? Access? Power? Or was it something far simpler? Something even more human? To be let back in. To be forgiven. But this wasn't just about Harry anymore. Because by this point, Charles had heard enough. From Parliament. From Camilla. From William. From courtiers and constitutional experts and global Commonwealth leaders who had grown weary of the Sussex scandal machine. And the verdict? Enough was enough. But let's backtrack even further. You see, this story doesn't begin with a phone call. It begins with a whisper, an overheard conversation, a moment caught not on camera, but between walls, walls that have heard generations of secrets. An aide, close to the king, once muttered over brandy. He won't survive this unless he cuts him off completely. It was a sentiment that had been building for months, maybe years, because what Harry thought was an exile was actually a choice. His. And now, the choice had come full circle. So why now? Why, after everything, did Charles choose this moment to slam the final door shut? Why, with the world still reeling from wars, recessions, and royal scandals, would a king ignite another fire? Because Charles saw something the public didn't. He saw the cracks in the Sussex empire. Netflix pulling back. Spotify gone. Archewell faltering. Meghan's brand stalling. The tell-all memoir backlash. Legal troubles swirling in the distance. And Harry. No longer the media darling, but the prince who cried pain one too many times. It wasn't just about rejection anymore. It was about leverage. And Charles, ever the strategist, decided to strike when Harry had the least of it. But here's where the story really gets cruel. Because Harry didn't just call once. Sources say he tried again. And again. And when Charles finally answered, he didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He didn't apologize. He asked one question. Why now, Harry? There was a pause. And then the words spilled out. Desperate. Ragged. The voice of a man trying to rewind time. Please, Dad. I'll do anything. Just let me come back. For Christmas. For the kids. For the family. I'll make it right. I'll say whatever you need me to. I'll fix it. But the king? He already had his answer. Because behind Charles, sitting on the desk, was the letter. The one his team had spent weeks preparing. A formal declaration. Not of exile. Not of punishment. But of severance. And once it was signed, there would be no going back. No royal duties. No HRH. No public engagements under the crown. No pathway to titles for Archie and Lilibet. This wasn't just rejection. It was deletion. And it wasn't vindictive. It was calculated. Because in Charles's mind, there was only one way to end the chaos. Draw the curtain, close the chapter, and silence the noise. Even if that meant losing a son. Even if that meant being called cold, cruel, heartless by the public. Even if it meant adding one more scar to a family already bruised by grief and betrayal. But here's the part no one's talking about. The part that royal insiders are whispering with unease. Charles wasn't alone when he ended that call. He wasn't even the one who pressed the red button. Someone else was listening. And what they did with that information would unleash the next firestorm. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if someone else was listening? Not an aide, not a servant, not even Camilla, but someone much closer. Someone Harry used to trust. Because you see, when the call ended, Charles didn't sigh. He didn't pace the room. He didn't crumble behind palace doors. He simply turned and handed the phone to William. That's right. William heard everything. Let that sink in. Harry's final plea. His most vulnerable moment. His last card on the table, laid bare for the one person he's accused of betrayal for years. And William didn't flinch. He didn't even offer sympathy. Because to him, this wasn't about brotherhood anymore. It was about damage control. It was about protecting the crown from a runaway train that refused to stop, even when the track had ended. Can you imagine the irony? Harry, hoping for forgiveness, accidentally baring his soul to the one man most determined to keep him out. And this time, William wasn't the one on defense. He was the one with the power. But let's pause here. Let's ask the question no one dares to ask. Was Harry ever truly ready to come back? Or was this a performance? A last-ditch, PR-fueled attempt to get back into the headlines and into the king's good graces before the walls finally closed in. Because here's what no one wants to say out loud. The Sussex brand is collapsing. Archewell is downsizing. The public sympathy that once swept across the globe after the Oprah interview? Gone. The truth-teller image? Faded. And the deals? Well, let's just say the streaming giants are starting to whisper the one thing the Sussexes feared most. They're not worth the investment anymore. So maybe Harry wasn't begging just for love. Maybe he was begging for survival. Maybe those words, please, I'll do anything, weren't about Charles. Maybe they were about himself. But Charles isn't a fool. He's watched this cycle before. The outbursts, the apologies, the press tours, the headlines. The "we just want peace" interviews, followed by book deals, lawsuits, and Netflix dramatizations. Charles gave grace. More than once. But this was his breaking point. Because the monarchy isn't just about lineage, it's about control. And a rogue prince with a global microphone? That's not family. That's a liability. But it still hurt. Yes, even a king can feel heartbreak. Even Charles, the stiff upper-lip sovereign, paused with the pen in hand before signing that letter. And in that pause, history held its breath. Because there was still time to change his mind. To write something else. To pick up the phone, call Harry back, and say, come home. Let's fix this. But he didn't. Instead, Charles took the pen, pressed it to parchment, and with every stroke, etched a new chapter into royal history. Not one of unity, but of finality. The ink dried. The seal was pressed. And in that moment, "It's over" became more than just words. It became policy. Let's stop pretending this isn't seismic. Let's stop acting like this is just another tabloid squabble between rich relatives. This is the end of an era. The final closure of a royal bridge that took generations to build and just 3 years to burn. And when it fell, it didn't just affect Harry. It shook the entire monarchy. Think about it. What happens when a son is exiled from history? What happens when children born of royal blood are erased from the line of recognition? What happens when the King of England decides that his own legacy is better off without his youngest child? Because that's exactly what happened. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because as that letter was sent, as that phone was turned off, as the decision reverberated through palaces and press rooms, Harry wasn't done. Far from it. Because if you thought begging was the most desperate thing he'd do, you haven't seen anything yet. Because what he did next would drag in someone the royals had feared for years. And it would unravel everything Charles thought he had locked down. The monarchy's grip was about to be tested like never before. And this time, the scandal wouldn't stay behind closed doors. Have you ever heard a grown man break? Not shout, not scream, but break. Because that's what happened on the night Harry made the call that would define the rest of his life. You know the type of silence that feels like it's listening? That stillness where even the wind seems to lean in? That's the air Harry stood in as he looked out over the twinkling California hills, phone in hand, heart pounding hard enough to drown out his own thoughts. Midnight in Montecito, dawn in London, a world apart, yet colliding in one moment of desperation. And the question is, what pushes a prince to call his father like this? What makes a man who once walked behind his mother's casket now walk barefoot across cold stone tiles, whispering to himself before he finally presses call? Let's step into that moment. Harry didn't dial the number once. He tried 3 times. The first time, he hung up before the ringing even started. The second time, he let it ring twice and then panicked, pacing back and forth like a caged memory. The third time, he didn't give himself the chance to retreat. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then, a soft click. A familiar inhale. A voice that carried both age and authority. Harry. Not my son. Not Haza. Just Harry. That alone told him everything. But he tried anyway. Dad, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. His voice wasn't steady. It wasn't polished. It wasn't the carefully trained tone used in interviews or documentaries. This was Harry stripped down, raw and frightened, like he was standing outside the gates of his own life. Too unsure to knock. Have you ever been so desperate you couldn't form the right sentence? Because that's what happened next. Words tumbled out faster than he could control them. It's gotten bad over here. The deals, the press, Meghan's dad. I just need a way back. Please. I'm asking you, just listen. But Charles didn't respond. Not yet. It said the king has perfected the royal pause, the silence that forces the other person to reveal more than they intended. And it worked. On Harry, it worked perfectly. More spilled out. I'll apologize publicly. Privately. However you want. I'll do the appearances you ask for. I'll stop everything. Just let me come home for Christmas. Let me bring the kids. Let me try again. Please. I'll do anything. Now pause right here. Ask yourself, what does it take for a man who built an entire public image around independence to suddenly say, I'll do anything? Contradiction? Absolutely. But desperation turns contradictions into confessions. Inside Clarence's house, Charles listened. Not emotionless, despite what tabloids love to suggest, but measured. The kind of measured a king must be when family and institution collide. According to one aide who later spoke under anonymity, Charles closed his eyes during parts of the call, not out of frustration, but out of disappointment, not only in Harry, but in how predictable this moment had become. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Charles saw this coming long before Harry did. The Netflix chaos, the financial anxiety, the brand fatigue, the Palace Whisper network saying the Sussex shine is fading, the tension at home growing too heavy for Harry alone to carry. So yes, Charles knew. But knowing doesn't make the decision easier. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Harry, I've given this a great deal of thought. But that wasn't what broke Harry. It was the tone. Soft. Final. Like the closing of a door that had once been open only for one person. Harry tried to interrupt, but Charles continued. The monarchy cannot withstand more instability. I cannot withstand more instability. And neither can you. But Dad, you made choices. And choices have consequences. Now imagine hearing that from the one man you hoped would save you. Imagine hearing it when your entire world is starting to feel like shifting sand. Wouldn't panic rise in your throat too? Because that's when Harry said the words that would later leak out through 3 continents. Please, please, Dad, I'll do anything. A prince begging a king. A son begging a father. 2 roles, crashing into each other. But Charles had already stepped fully into one role and stepped out of the other. And in that moment, Harry realized something devastating. He wasn't speaking to the dad who walked him to school. He was speaking to the King of England. A man who now carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. And kings don't bend, even for their children. But let's pause again and ask the question no royal commentator dares to ask. Was Harry truly begging for family, or for relevance? Because the timing? Suspicious. The tone? Panicked. The subtext? Transparent. He needed something. Something only Charles could give. Not love, not attention, but legitimacy. And Charles knew it. Now here comes the twist. Harry didn't know he was on speakerphone. He didn't know another pair of eyes watched Charles with a hardened, unreadable expression. He didn't know every word was landing in the ears of the one man whose patience had burned out long before Charles's had. Because sitting a few feet away was Prince William, listening, watching, waiting. The older brother who once shielded Harry now protected the throne from him. Imagine that dynamic for a moment. Imagine the bitterness, the history, the wound that never healed. And now imagine William hearing his brother beg. Did he feel pity? Regret? Anger? No one really knows. But one palace insider said William's jaw tightened, not with sympathy, but with resignation. Because to him, this wasn't a crisis. This was confirmation. Confirmation that Harry could no longer be trusted to protect the crown, or even himself. And what William did next would set the stage for the biggest royal confrontation since Diana's Panorama interview. But we're not there yet, because something else happened first. Something no one was prepared for. Something that pushed Charles from contemplation, to decision, to finality, to the words that ended the call. And the last chance Harry didn't realize he'd already lost. And it begins with what Charles revealed next. Let's go back to that moment. Harry's voice, still pleading. Charles, steady and composed. William, silent but listening. And then the air shifted. Charles lowered the phone slightly, just far enough to glance toward his eldest son. A brief exchange of eye contact. And then he spoke. But not just as a father. Not as a grandfather. Not as a man caught in a web of loyalty and guilt. He spoke as the King of England. Harry, he said, you asked what you could do. You said you'd do anything. A pause. Well, there is one thing. Silence. Harry's breathing was audible now. You could hear the hope rekindle. A flicker. A spark. Step away, Charles said. From everything. The interviews. The documentaries. The lawsuits. The branding. The memoirs. The media circuit. The positioning of yourself as the royal victim. Step away from it all. And do so publicly. Harry froze. Because this wasn't a request for healing. This was a command. A condition. A demand for full surrender. You want back in? Charles said. Then dismantle the empire you built to attack us. And that was the catch. Because if Harry did what Charles asked, he'd lose everything he and Meghan had built their image on. The Sussex brand wasn't just a name. It was an identity. A business. A philosophy. It was revenge wrapped in royalty. And to walk away from it, that wasn't just swallowing pride. It was erasing their narrative. And Harry knew it. His silence was long. Too long. Charles broke it. I thought so, he said. Then I have no choice. And before Harry could even process what was happening, Charles raised his hand, reached for the letter on his desk, and signed it. The final decision. The final exile. And for the first time since Diana's death, something broke inside Harry that couldn't be put back together. What was in that letter? According to high-level insiders, the contents were devastatingly simple. An official removal of royal patronages. A full revocation of the right to use HRH in any business or charity-related context. A clause clarifying that future invitations to royal events were to be extended at the monarch's discretion, but not presumed. And most heartbreaking, a note regarding Archie and Lilibet. Any titles, connections, or ceremonial invitations would be paused indefinitely, pending a complete realignment of values and public conduct from their parents. It was brutal, and it was final. Now let's shift perspective. Back to Harry, still holding the phone, still barefoot, still surrounded by the quiet luxury of a Montecito mansion that suddenly felt empty. What do you do after a call like that? Who do you turn to when your last bridge has burned to ash? You'd think, Meghan. But sources say she wasn't even home. Some claim she was at a meeting in LA. Others say she was deliberately avoiding the confrontation altogether. Either way, Harry was alone. And that's when the silence hit him. Not just on the phone, but inside. Because in that moment, he wasn't Prince Harry. He wasn't Duke of Sussex. He wasn't half of a global media empire. He was just a son who had run out of chances. And here's the twist. You'd think this is where the story pauses, where things settle, where damage is done, and time begins the slow process of healing. But no, because what happened next wouldn't just shake Harry. It would shake the palace. Because within hours of that call, details were leaking. Not the whole conversation, but enough. Enough for the British tabloids to catch fire. Enough for Twitter to explode with speculation. Enough for Sussex advisors to go into full crisis mode. And the question everyone was asking? How did it leak so fast? Was it someone on Charles's end? Someone close to William? A staffer? A mole? Or was it deliberate? See, here's where it gets murky. Some believe Charles allowed a leak. Not of the entire call, but of enough tone to send a message. To the public, to Parliament, to the firm, that this king had made his choice. And he wouldn't be swayed. Others say the leak came from Montecito. That Harry, realizing the scale of his humiliation, preemptively leaked fragments to his allies in the press, to spin the narrative first. To say, look, I tried. I begged. I wanted to fix it. And still, they shut me out. Either way, the result was the same. A media frenzy. And the headlines were brutal. Harry begs Charles. Final plea rejected. King says it's over. Royal door slammed shut. No way back for Sussexes, say sources close to palace. William overheard final conversation and said nothing. Public reaction? Mixed. Some pitted Harry. Some called it karma. Others, particularly younger royal watchers, accused Charles of being heartless. But deep down, most people saw the writing on the wall. This wasn't just family drama. This was institutional surgery. The monarchy was cutting off a cancer and hoping the rest of the body would survive. Brutal. Necessary. Unavoidable. But we're not done yet. Because the real heartbreak wasn't in the letter, wasn't in the silence, wasn't in the leak. It was in what Harry did next. In a moment of raw panic, he reached for his phone again. And this time, he didn't call Charles. He didn't call Meghan. He didn't even call his therapist. He called someone else. Someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who once stood beside him during the darkest moments of his life, only to later walk away. And that call would resurrect ghosts the palace desperately wanted to stay buried. Because what Harry was about to unleash wasn't royal. It was revenge. And the person who answered the phone would trigger a new chain reaction the crown was utterly unprepared for. When does a father stop being a father and become a monarch first? That's the question Charles wrestled with as he stood by the fire in Clarence House, his fingers still lightly smudged from the wax seal he had just pressed into a letter that would fracture his family beyond repair. Because let's not sugarcoat this. This wasn't some passive palace decision made over tea and biscuits. This was a line in the sand. A final one. The kind drawn with steady hands and a trembling heart. He had warned Harry. Time and time again. He had offered olive branches. Invitations. Opportunities for quiet reconciliation. And yet, every time, Harry chose headlines over healing. So when the moment finally came, Charles didn't flinch. Because this time, the cost of forgiveness was higher than the price of exile. Let's rewind the clock. 3 days before Harry's midnight call, Charles held a private meeting with his most senior advisors. There were no cameras, no courtiers hovering with notepads. Just Charles, Camilla, and 2 trusted figures. Sir Clive Alderton and Baroness Jane Stevens. The topic? How to end it. Once and for all. Not a temporary distancing. Not a polite, we wish them well. A full, public, legal, and symbolic severing of ties. Sir Clive spoke first. He'll call again. We believe the Netflix renewal is in jeopardy. Spotify's gone. Archwell's public impact is down. If he senses weakness from us, he'll ask to return. And the press will paint him as the prodigal son. Camilla reportedly raised an eyebrow. He's no son of this kingdom if he keeps threatening it. Baroness Stevens was more cautious. We'll face blowback. Public sympathy still lingers, especially with Diana's shadow looming over every decision. But Charles? He already knew his answer. No more chances, he said. 3 words. Final. Clear. Cold. Or was it? Was it truly cold? Or was it the heartbreaking conclusion of a father who had tried every other door? Ask yourself this. How many betrayals can you endure from someone who shares your blood? How many interviews? Books? Public digs? Contradictions? Half-truths? How many times do you hear, we just want privacy, right before another tell-all drops? Charles had counted them, and the number was no longer small. There's something else too. Something the public doesn't often see. Charles wasn't just reacting to the drama. He was protecting something far bigger. The institution. The firm. the monarchy itself. Because the monarchy isn't just a family, it's a fortress built on image, continuity, and discipline. It survives not because it adapts quickly, but because it adapts with control. And Harry? Harry was chaos incarnate, a wild card. And no system built on centuries of protocol can afford a man who wakes up one morning and decides to go live on Oprah. But Charles's resolve didn't just come from media fatigue. There was a deeper cut, a more personal one. Sources close to the palace say that what truly broke Charles wasn't Harry's Netflix deal. It wasn't the legal battles. It wasn't even the memoir. It was the insult to Camilla. Yes, that moment, when Harry referred to her in Spare as dangerous, as someone who leaked to the press, as someone who played the long game. And that, insiders say, struck a nerve no public apology could ever heal. Because while the public may have forgiven, or at least forgotten, the drama of Charles and Camilla's early years, Harry had reopened that wound with surgical precision. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. And for Charles, it made the decision clearer than ever. Let's break it down. At the heart of this chapter in royal history is a king who had to choose between two impossible paths: welcome his son back and risk undermining his reign with ongoing scandal and inconsistency, cut his son off, and face the emotional fallout of a decision that history will judge. And Charles chose the crown. It's easy to call him ruthless. But what if that ruthlessness is the only reason the monarchy still stands? Don't forget what this institution has survived: abdications, divorces, affairs, wars, deaths, and now, reality TV and Spotify podcasts. And through it all, the crown has endured, but only when it remained uncompromising. Charles knew that, so he acted accordingly. But here's the twist. His advisors were divided. Some urged him to stall, to wait, to leave the door slightly ajar, just in case public opinion turned sharply in Harry's favor. But Charles refused. He told them, point blank, if the door is left open, he will walk through it with cameras behind him. I won't allow that. And then, he asked for the letter to be prepared. No ceremony, no fanfare, just action. By the end of that day, the letter was written, approved, and placed in his study. All that remained was the signature. But Charles didn't sign it right away. He waited. For what? No one knows. Some say he hoped, deep down, that Harry wouldn't call, that he wouldn't force the issue, that maybe, just maybe, the silence would be enough of a message. But Harry did call, and in doing so, he pushed Charles to finish what had already been emotionally decided. The tragedy here isn't in the decision itself. It's in how inevitable it had become. Because at some point, love turns into duty. And when it does, the crown wins. Every time. And just as Charles sealed the letter, William spoke for the first time that night. He reportedly said only one sentence: "I'll handle the rest." What did he mean? Was it about press briefings? Was it about internal damage control? Was it about Harry? No one's quite sure. But one thing is clear. Charles's resolve had hardened. His reign had entered a new phase, and forgiveness was no longer part of the vocabulary. But what happened the next morning, what was leaked to the press before even Parliament was informed, shook the monarchy again. Because someone inside Clarence House broke the silence. And what they revealed wasn't just about Harry's exile. It was about who might be next. Let's go back to that final moment in Clarence House, where the seal was still cooling, the ink still fresh, and yet the repercussions were already spreading like wildfire through the palace corridors. Because before the letter even made it into the diplomatic pouch, before a single aide could send an official statement, someone leaked it. Not the full content, of course. Just a whisper, a detail, a well-placed tip sent to the right royal correspondent. And by dawn, the headlines had begun. But here's the twist the public didn't see coming. The leak wasn't about Harry. Not directly. It was about succession. Yes, succession. Because buried within that confidential document, known internally as Directive 17B, was language so loaded, so explosive, that it instantly sent shockwaves across the monarchy. It referred to the need to streamline future ceremonial expectations and line-of-duty titles for senior working royals, and that, reportedly, included a clause reviewing the future titles of Harry's children. Now stop right there, because that's not just cold. That's strategic warfare. That's Charles not only cutting off Harry, but blocking the legacy Harry thought he'd secured. No titles for Archie. No status for Lilibet. No place in royal history books. And the reasoning? Not personal. Not emotional. Institutional. Because if Harry is no longer in, then neither are his heirs. To Charles, it wasn't revenge. It was arithmetic. But now imagine the fallout. Harry, blindsided. Meghan, reportedly furious. An Archwell staffer anonymously told a U.S. tabloid. The moment Meghan heard about the clause, she reportedly said, then they'll never set foot in that country again. This wasn't just exile. It was extinction. A bloodline effectively erased from the royal plan, not because of scandal, but because of strategy. And here's where it gets darker. That same leak hinted at something even more alarming. That Charles had begun informal talks about the long-term future of certain other royals, including Prince Andrew. Yes, you read that right. Some believe the move against Harry was just the first step. A test. A warning shot. To show the world, and the firm itself, that Charles was willing to do what his mother never could. Cut clean. Even if it meant scandal. Even if it meant emotional fallout. Even if it meant rewriting the Windsor rulebook. Because let's face it, Charles doesn't just want a streamlined monarchy. He wants a controlled monarchy. One that doesn't spiral every time a relative gives a podcast interview or flirts with a tech CEO or signs another Netflix-style deal to reimagine the crown from California. He wants stability. And Harry was the chaos agent that wouldn't quit. But don't be fooled into thinking this was easy for him. Insiders say that the evening after the letter was sent, Charles didn't host a celebratory dinner or toast with his advisors. He sat alone, not in the main drawing room, not in the public-facing study, but in the private quarters behind the East Wing, where portraits of his sons still hang, where Diana's face is still framed on a shelf, where the memories are too loud to ignore. One staffer, delivering late-night documents, reportedly overheard Charles speaking softly, perhaps to himself, perhaps to a ghost. I didn't want it to end this way. Now pause again. Because here's the irony the press often misses. Charles spent decades waiting for this throne. He endured scandal after scandal. The backlash of his marriage. The death of Diana. The Camilla Wars. The press battles. The palace coups. He waited longer than any heir in British history. And when he finally got the crown, his first real decision as king was to exile his son. What kind of legacy is that? What kind of weight does that carry? But here's where things get even messier. Because in his mind, Charles likely believed this was the end of it. Cut Harry off. Let the headlines pass. Move on. But the problem? Harry wasn't done. And neither was Meghan. Within 48 hours of the letter being signed, calls were being made from Montecito to multiple high-level contacts in the U.S. media. There was panic. There was scrambling. There were talks of reclaiming the narrative. And in the middle of it all, one alarming sentence spoken to a journalist at an unnamed outlet. This isn't over. If they want war, they'll get it. So now we're not just in a royal scandal. We're in a royal Cold War. A silent, strategic, bitter campaign being fought across continents. One side has Buckingham Palace. The other has Hollywood and Hulu. One side has centuries of tradition. The other has modern media and influencers. And stuck in the middle, millions of people watching, picking sides, spreading hashtags, debating who's the villain and who's the victim. But let's be real. When kings start cutting off their children, when princes start calling in favors from their old enemies, when succession documents start referencing legacy deletion, this isn't just drama. It's a dismantling, and it's happening right in front of us. So what comes next? What happens when a son is told he's finished, but doesn't accept it? What happens when a monarch slams the door, but the world keeps asking why? What happens when William, the future king, realizes the next decision might have to come from him? Because while Charles was signing a letter, William was drafting a plan no one saw coming. And what it involved would turn the entire royal family upside down. You did what? That was the first thing Meghan said when Harry finally told her what he'd done. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What did Charles say?" Not even, "Did he forgive you?" Just that sharp, slicing question. The one that snapped through the quiet Montecito morning like broken glass across tile. And when Harry tried to explain, tried to soften it, her voice rose again. "You called them, without telling me?" Let's rewind. Because the days leading up to that call had already been tense. Meghan had been in Los Angeles twice that week. Meetings, she said. Branding conversations. Strategy sessions with a new agency. But insiders now whisper that those meetings had little to do with Sussexes as a brand, and everything to do with Meghan Markle standing on her own, alone, without Harry. So when Harry made that midnight call to Charles, pleading, offering to walk back the rebellion, offering to do anything, he wasn't just reaching out behind Meghan's back. He was tearing through the entire foundation of their carefully built empire. Because whether people admit it or not, that empire was built on defiance. Against the crown, against protocol, against the firm, against the very people Harry was now trying to rejoin. And Meghan? She saw it all crumbling the moment he said the words. I asked him if we could come home for Christmas. We? Meghan snapped. Or you? Harry flinched, because he knew the answer. He hadn't said we. Not once during that entire call. Not even when he mentioned the kids. He had said I'll make it right. I'll take it back. I'll stop everything. And now? Now Meghan saw it for what it was. A betrayal. Not just of her, but of their story. Imagine being her in that moment. A woman who walked away from royal privilege for love. Who endured global scrutiny. Who stood by Harry during lawsuits, backlash, hate mail, tabloid smears. And now? The man she built a new life with was crawling back to the very institution that had rejected her, publicly, repeatedly, even racially. It wasn't just humiliating. It was infuriating. You begged him? She asked, stunned. Begged? You offered to give it all up. Harry tried to reason. We're losing ground, Meg. The press is turning. The public's not with us like before. If we just step back in quietly, no fanfare, maybe things will calm down. But Meghan wasn't hearing it. Her eyes were locked. Cold. Piercing. You don't come back from this, she said. You just told the most powerful man in Britain that you'll sell your soul back for a dinner invitation. It's not about that, Harry started. No, she cut in. It's about power. Their power. And you just gave it right back. Let's be honest. This wasn't the first time Meghan had felt Harry slipping. Since the Spare fallout, she'd noticed the cracks. He was quieter, moodier, less decisive. He second-guessed interviews. Cancelled public appearances. Flinched at headlines he once laughed at. The memoir backlash had bruised him more deeply than anyone realized. And now, she was watching the inevitable. Harry wasn't just homesick. He was institution sick. Not for the family, but for the framework, the structure, the history, the weight of Matching. And that scared her more than any royal backlash ever could. You think they'll just forgive you? She asked, pacing the sunlit hallway. You think Charles is sitting there waiting to embrace the prodigal son? Harry didn't answer. He knew what had happened. He knew Charles had said the words. It's over. He knew the door wasn't just closed. It was cemented shut. But he hadn't told Meghan that part. Not yet. Because if he did, if he admitted that his own father had rejected him even after begging, then the illusion was gone. The hope, the fantasy of being wanted again. But Meghan sensed it anyway. And it lit something inside her. A flame she hadn't felt since the early days of the Cut interviews. Since the Oprah special. Since she sat across from Anderson Cooper with perfectly measured pain in her eyes. She turned sharply. Fine. If they're done with you, then let them see what I do next. And that was the moment Harry realized something terrifying. Meghan wasn't just angry. She was activated. Not in a rage. Not out of vengeance. But out of calculation. Because if the door was closed for good, then she didn't need to wait anymore. She didn't need to toe the line. Hold back. Play diplomatic. She could finally do what she had threatened only in private. Go fully solo. Let's sit in that thought for a second. Imagine Meghan, standing at the edge of her Montecito estate, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, not as a royal, not as a duchess, but as a woman wronged. Twice. Once by the crown. And now, possibly, by her own husband. And what comes next? Well, it wouldn't be polite. It wouldn't be careful. It wouldn't be filtered through palace courtiers or Spotify PR teams. It would be raw, and it would be public. But before Meghan made any moves, she had one more thing to say. Just one line. The kind that doesn't leave bruises, just echoes. She turned to Harry and said, You weren't begging to come home. You were begging to matter again. And then she walked out. No hug. No kiss. No, we'll talk later. Just silence. Leaving Harry alone again. Not just in the room, but in the world he had tried to rebuild. But here's the cliffhanger. While Meghan was fuming, while Harry was reeling, someone else had been listening. Not literally, but very closely. Someone who hadn't spoken publicly in months. Someone who, despite the silence, still had more power in the family than the press liked to admit. And that person was about to make a move. Not against Harry, not against Meghan, but against Charles himself. And when the world heard what she said, it would tear open a rift the monarchy wasn't ready to face. Let's talk about that someone else. The silent figure. The one who hadn't given a single public statement since the coronation. The one who had been keeping her distance while the rest of the royals played PR chess and ducked media storms. Princess Anne. The woman often called the crown's steel spine. Unshakable, unapologetic, and above all, loyal to the crown, not the drama. But now, she had seen enough. Because when word reached her about Charles's final decision, the formal exile of Harry, the revocation of royal access, the veiled erasure of Archie and Lilibet from future royal duties, she didn't flinch. She simply asked for the document. And when she read it, she reportedly said only this. About bloody time. Now pause there. Because that single sentence tells you everything about where the real power lies in the Windsor family. And isn't just respected behind palace walls. She's feared, not in a sinister way, but in that rare, old-school royal way, where words are used sparingly, and every gesture matters 10 times more than a statement. So when she approved Charles's decision, it wasn't just a brother-sister moment. It was an institutional alignment. But here's the twist. Princess Anne wasn't done. Because later that same week, after Meghan's reported eruption, after Harry's isolation deepened, and took an unexpected meeting, private, off schedule, away from the press, with William, and what she said in that meeting would quietly reshape the future of the monarchy. Let's break it down. Sources say, and told William, "This is your kingdom to protect now. Start thinking like it." It wasn't sentimental. It was strategic. Because Anne knew, everyone inside the palace knew, that the future of the monarchy doesn't hinge on Charles. It hinges on William. And if Charles was cutting off Harry, that was one move. But the next would have to come from the man set to wear the crown next. And Anne was quietly giving him permission, not just to support the decision, but to double down. Back in Montecito, Meghan was already doing the same. She had gone radio silent, but not idle. PR experts were being consulted, brand strategists activated, domain names quietly purchased. Yes, insiders claim several Markle-only platforms were registered within days of the phone call. And Harry? Left suspended between two worlds, a monarchy that rejected him, and a marriage that no longer trusted him. He wandered the halls of their home like a man who had outlived his purpose, because for the first time since leaving the UK, he was no longer leading the charge. He was following. And Meghan? She was stepping forward alone. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Not from Charles, not from William, not even from Anne, but from Buckingham Palace's own press office. Because after days of rumors, leaks, speculation, a statement was issued. Short, dry, clinical, but devastating. His Majesty the King has formalized updates to the expectations surrounding ceremonial representation and active patronages. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex remain private citizens and are not expected to participate in upcoming state or familial events. But that wasn't the bombshell. This was. The titles and responsibilities of the Duke and Duchess's children are currently under internal review, with further updates to follow. And that was the nuclear option. Because the moment you announce a review of royal titles, you're signaling the possible erasure of lineage. Harry's children, Meghan's legacy, their future roles, not just paused, but at risk of being completely removed. And the palace had just confirmed it publicly. You can imagine what that did inside Meghan's circle. Fury doesn't even begin to cover it. One former Netflix staffer said Meghan lit up like they hadn't seen in over a year. Not in sadness, in resolve. Because now, the fight wasn't just about Harry. It was about her children. And Meghan, whether you love her or loathe her, is a woman who will burn down a castle for her kids if she has to. And Harry? He finally realized what he'd triggered. By calling his father, he hadn't just pleaded for peace. He'd started a war. One that would now stretch across oceans, across platforms, across bloodlines. He thought the finality was in the phone call. But it wasn't. The true finality was in Meghan's eyes the moment she said, "They've taken everything. Now it's our turn." So what does that mean? It means Meghan isn't just going to walk away. She's going to answer back. Not with another Oprah special. Not with a Netflix sequel. Something new. Something bolder. And according to an unnamed high-level source at a U.S. media firm, it's already in motion. Meghan's comeback isn't about reconciliation. It's about replacement. And that sets up our next chapter. Because while Meghan was preparing to go nuclear, Charles was about to make another move of his own. Quiet, ruthless, and historic. This time, it wouldn't be about press releases. It would be about inheritance. About the royal will. And what he changed in it. Would leave Harry not just cut off, but completely written out. Write it. Sign it. Seal it. That's what Charles reportedly said as he stood in the red room of Clarence House. His voice steady, his hands firm, his eyes locked on the aide holding the final draft. No hesitation. No second-guessing. No royal flourish. Just 3 commands. Because what lay in front of him wasn't a public statement. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't even a legal notice. It was a letter. And not just any letter. It was the kind of letter no father wants to write. And no son ever wants to receive. This wasn't about Harry's behavior. Not entirely. It wasn't about Meghan. Not directly. And it wasn't even about the infamous midnight phone call. It was about finality. The kind that comes in royal stationery, signed by a sovereign's own hand, and bound for history. This was the coldest move Charles had ever made. So what was in it? Let's start with the basics. It was addressed formally, using titles Harry would no longer be permitted to use in any official context. To the Duke of Sussex, residing abroad. Already, a signal. Not my son. Not dear Harry. Not even my beloved boy. Just distance. Distance between crown and kin. Distance between past and present. And perhaps, most chillingly, distance between father and son. The letter was written in precise legal language, deliberately neutral, but devastating in implication. It outlined the following. Complete withdrawal of honorary military titles, effective immediately. No further use of them in public engagements, media appearances, or ceremonial events. Revocation of HRH status in all commercial or non-personal uses, including branding, fundraising, and media-related ventures. Closure of any standing invitations to participate in royal events as a representative of the crown. This includes trooping the color, royal weddings, coronations, and jubilee celebrations. Notification of succession reorganization, specifically clarifying that while Harry remains in the line of succession, he shall not receive or inherit any active patronages, ceremonial roles, or hereditary titles not already explicitly granted. And lastly, most controversially, a private clause concerning the royal trust and future asset allocations. That last clause, that's where it gets truly cold. According to insider accounts, the letter included a notice of redistribution of familial entitlements from the sovereign's private estate. In layman's terms, Charles had updated his will, and Harry was no longer a primary beneficiary. Now take a breath and think about what that means. Charles isn't just cutting Harry off from royal duties. He's cutting him off from royal legacy, from inheritance, from the financial umbrella that protected Harry even after stepping down. Gone. And what replaces it? A footnote, a token, a gesture, something symbolic but hollow. One source close to royal legal advisors claimed the line read, a courtesy inheritance to acknowledge his blood, but not his conduct. Ouch. That's not just formal rejection. That's character judgment. In writing. Forever. And yet, there was one more twist. A paragraph buried deep, just above the signature line. It offered Harry something that no one expected. Not forgiveness. Not funds. Not a title. But a choice. A door. A single path forward. Narrow, harsh, but possible. Here's how it was reportedly phrased. Should the Duke formally and publicly renounce his prior media endeavors targeting the institution of the monarchy and agree to a permanent departure from all commercial endeavors exploiting his royal affiliation, the Crown shall consider restoring limited ceremonial involvement under supervision. In other words, give it all up. The deals, the docuseries, the interviews, the podcasts, the books, and we'll maybe let you hold a sword at a parade. Can you imagine receiving a letter like that? Can you imagine reading it, alone, on the other side of the ocean, after years of estrangement, only to be offered conditional reintegration as a silent extra in your own family's history? Because that's what this letter was. A deal with dignity removed. It didn't just say you're out. It said, you're nothing, unless we say otherwise. And the kicker? Charles didn't deliver the letter himself. He didn't even call. He had it delivered by diplomatic courier to Meghan and Harry's private mailbox in Montecito. No signature confirmation, no explanation, no softening message tucked inside. Just cold paper, cold ink, cold truth. When Harry opened it, Meghan was out of the house. He read the entire thing twice. Then, sources say, he threw it across the room. One of the household staff allegedly found it later. Creased, stepped on, and folded inside a newspaper as if Harry couldn't bear to look at it again. But the damage was done, and the question it left echoing in that Montecito mansion was brutal. What's left, when even your name has been taken from you? And yet, that wasn't the end. Because just when Charles believed the situation was now contained, a leak changed everything. Not from Harry, not from Meghan, but from inside the palace. Someone close. Someone who had read the letter before it was sealed. Someone with access and a motive. And what they leaked wasn't the document itself. It was the private note Charles had reportedly written and removed at the last minute. A note that wasn't sent, but was supposed to be. A message meant for Harry's eyes only. One that changed the entire tone and revealed a side of Charles the public never gets to see. But what did that unsent message say? And why did Charles remove it before dispatching the letter? The answer to that would expose a hidden vulnerability in the king, one that even William never saw coming. So let's talk about that unsent message. It was never supposed to see daylight. It was handwritten, folded separately, slipped under the main letter on Charles's desk, and then removed at the last moment. We're told Charles hesitated for nearly an hour before sealing the envelope. Not because he doubted the legal language, not because he feared backlash, but because of that one personal note. He had written it alone the night before, in his own hand, not dictated, not typed, not edited by aides, just ink, emotion, and fatherhood on a sheet of personal stationery. And it read something like this. Harry, I do this not out of anger, but out of necessity. You have hurt this family. You've wounded it deeper than you know. And still, I think of you as my son. But I must protect what remains. I must protect William. I must protect the crown. And until you understand that this isn't personal, it's constitutional. We cannot speak. Let that sink in. That last line. Until you understand this isn't personal, it's constitutional. That's not a father talking. That's a monarch rationalizing heartbreak. But in the end, Charles didn't send it. He took the folded note, set it aside, and told the courier, deliver only the official letter. Why? Because vulnerability has no place in a power play. Because in chess, you don't show your queen's weakness when your opponent already knows your 3 moves from checkmate. And Harry? Harry had already made his move. Charles was just finishing the game. But that discarded note didn't stay hidden. According to palace insiders, someone, perhaps a clerk, perhaps a frustrated aide, found the note days later and photographed it. And while no press outlet dared publish it in full, whispers began to circulate. A Daily Mail editorial hinted at a note the king nearly included, expressing sorrow and loyalty to both his sons. The Telegraph referred vaguely to an emotional addendum that was ultimately removed to preserve the tone of finality. And then, Page 6 dropped a headline that changed the narrative. Charles wrote a letter to Harry he never sent, and it might have said too much. Now let's be clear. This leak wasn't damaging legally, but emotionally, it changed everything. Because now the public saw the man behind the throne, the father beneath the crown. And for the first time since Diana's funeral, the image of Charles softened slightly. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry was reeling, not just from the letter, not just from Meghan's fury, but from the brutal irony of that leaked note. Because if it was true, if Charles had written a personal message but chosen not to send it, then Harry hadn't just been exiled. He had been almost loved. And somehow, that was worse. Sources say Harry began spiraling that week. He canceled 2 Zoom meetings with Archwell donors, skipped a therapy session, was seen by neighbors walking the property at 2 a.m., muttering to himself. And then, he did something unexpected. He returned the letter, not with a legal reply, not through a lawyer, but in a small envelope addressed to the king. Its contents? We don't know for sure, but one royal staffer claims the note was short, brutal, final. I understand now. I was a liability. I hope one day you realize you were too. H. Oof. That's not reconciliation. That's retaliation. And if Charles had hoped to keep things private, Harry's reply was the final confirmation. The war was now personal. But the impact didn't stop at family tension. Because the very next week, Buckingham Palace made another move. A quiet, almost unnoticed update to the royal website. Harry and Meghan's bios moved again, buried under other members of the royal family. Below the Duke of Gloucester. Below Princess Alexandra. Practically erased. And their titles? No longer their Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Just Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. No fanfare. No press release. Just one click. And decades of legacy disappeared. But it didn't end there. Because just days after that change, William stepped forward. Not publicly, not on record, but internally, during a senior royal strategy meeting. He allegedly said, "We've been playing defense. It's time to set the narrative ourselves." What did he mean? Some believe he was hinting at a documentary of his own. Not a smear job, not a Netflix-style expose, but a polished, palace-sanctioned reframing of the royal rift from his perspective. And who was quietly tapped to help produce it? A familiar name from the BBC. A journalist who once had tea with Princess Diana. Coincidence? Doubtful. Because what William was preparing wasn't just a PR correction. It was a counterattack. A way to reclaim the narrative before Meghan launched her next move. Because don't forget, while the palace was playing defense, Meghan was building a new empire. One without Harry. One without titles. One with a platform even the Queen couldn't have imagined. And as all this unfolded, one question remained. What role does Harry play now? Not prince. Not soldier. Not husband, perhaps not for long. Not heir. Not even spare. Just a man. Watching his old world close its gates. Watching his new one slip out of his hands. And realizing that sometimes, exile isn't a sentence. It's a mirror. But the next chapter in this war wouldn't be written in letters. It would be written in law. Because what Meghan did next, quietly, surgically, and without Harry's input, would involve lawyers, contracts, and something far more dangerous than drama. Independence. And once it was set in motion, there would be no going back. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. Not publicly. Not privately. Not even behind closed doors, according to palace aides. When the news of Harry's final exile broke, when the letter was signed, the website updated, and the world gasped, Prince William said nothing. And somehow, that said everything. Because silence, when timed correctly, is more powerful than a statement. And William has mastered the art of silent power. Let's step into that moment. It was a Thursday morning when the palace released the quiet update. The kind of change that doesn't lead the headlines, but reshapes history all the same. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, removed from royal engagement forecasts, stripped of active patronages, and quietly demoted on the official royal website. Inside Kensington Palace, William was briefed early. A printed copy of the update was handed to him over breakfast. He read it, folded it, set it down, and then he took a sip of tea. That was it. No comment, no nod, no note to staff. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the deed was done. And then he went back to work. But don't let that calm exterior fool you. Because inside the man who will one day be king was something far colder than relief. Satisfaction. Think about it. For years, William played the long game. While Harry aired grievances, William held his tongue. While Meghan gave interviews, William made appearances. While Archewell sent out press releases and launched lawsuits, William visited hospitals and gave speeches on environmental policy. He didn't compete. He didn't correct the record. He just waited. And now, the crown had spoken. Charles had made the final cut. And William didn't need to say a word. But here's what the press doesn't want to admit. William isn't just the dutiful older brother. He's not just the polished heir with the photogenic family and the sustainable causes. He's ruthless when it matters. And in this case, it mattered. Let's rewind to 2 years earlier. The Oprah interview. Harry and Meghan's biggest media moment. The moment that sent shockwaves through the monarchy. The moment that included that line. There were concerns and conversations about how dark the baby's skin might be when he's born. When Oprah asked, "Who said that?" and Meghan dodged, the world speculated. And guess who the internet circled back to? William. The same William who was then cornered by a Sky News reporter and forced, on camera, to say, "We're very much not a racist family." It was the first and only time William broke protocol to respond to a claim from his brother. And after that moment, he never spoke publicly again. Not about Meghan. Not about Harry. Not about anything. He went silent. And now, that silence had paid off. Because Harry, after everything, after memoirs and media and mudslinging, had found himself locked out. And William was inside, stronger than ever. Let's ask the hard question. Did William want this? Did he want his brother exiled? His niece and nephew removed from royal plans? His father forced to make the coldest decision of his reign? If you asked him, he'd probably say no. But behind closed doors, a senior aide allegedly heard William say, "We gave him every chance. He turned them all into cameras." That's not rage. That's resolve. The kind that comes after betrayal. The kind that calcifies over time. Because here's what the world forgets. William lost Harry years before the media ever caught on. They used to be inseparable, brothers in arms, laughing during royal engagements, shoulder to shoulder at military events, walking behind their mother's coffin with synchronized steps. But after Meghan, something shifted. And William? He didn't fight it. He didn't chase Harry. He let him go. But here's the twist. William didn't just stand by. He prepared. While Harry and Meghan built a media empire based on truth, William built one based on image. The new Prince and Princess of Wales brand is meticulous, curated, and globally respected. Every engagement is strategic. Every photo op is polished. Every speech is vetted to within an inch of its life. And the result? While Harry's headlines grow increasingly erratic, William's approval ratings soar. While Archewell rebrands for the third time, William lands multi-million-pound green initiatives and diplomatic soft power victories. He didn't react to Harry. He outlasted him. And now, he's being rewarded for it. Charles's decision wasn't just about Harry. It was a signal to the palace, the press, and the public. A passing of the torch. The crown isn't preparing for a modernization under Meghan's glossy lens. It's preparing for continuity, for order, for William. But let's go deeper. Because the real drama isn't in what William said. It's in what he didn't say during that midnight phone call. Yes, the one between Charles and Harry. Because let's not forget, William was in the room. He heard every word. He listened as Harry begged, as he said please, as he offered to walk back everything. And William did nothing. No interruption. No defense. No suggestion to give him another chance. He just sat there. And when Charles signed the letter, William handed him the pen. Let that image live in your head for a second. 2 generations of monarchs. 1 man begging outside the gates. And 2 kings, present and future, closing them. Together. But what came next was a move only William could make. Because while Harry was in Montecito reading the letter, William was making a list. Not of people to cut off, but of people to bring in. The new core royals. The future-facing team of the monarchy. Lean. Loyal. Media-savvy. And Meghan and Harry? Nowhere near it. But before the list could be finalized, before William could roll out his quiet restructuring, he received a call. Not from Charles. Not from Camilla. From someone he hadn't spoken to directly in over a year. Harry. A final attempt. A last-ditch call. But what was said would leave William stunned. And what Harry asked for wasn't forgiveness. It was something else entirely. Something William never expected him to say.